We have apologies from councillors Pat Frost, Mike Hodge, Nabil Nazir, Julia Potts, Sam Pritchard and John Ward. Thank you.
Thank you. 3, disclosure of interests. Emma, prior to the meeting.
None prior to the meeting, but all Farnham Town councillors declare a non-pecuniary interest in the application as normal.
Thank you. And Emma, a question by members of the public. Have we had any?
None received.
Members, questions?
None received.
Thank you. Any relevant government guidance or legislation? I think that's a no.
That's a no, Chairman.
Thank you. Item 7, performance against government targets. It's on pages 5 and 6. Beth, all yours.
Thank you, Chairman. So page 5 provides members with an update on the planning service performance against the 2 government indicators. Those are on speed and quality. The numbers really speak for themselves. We're meeting and exceeding those targets. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed. Applications for planning permission, and it's subject to public speaking. A1, WA 2018-0348, the workshop, Waden Mill Lane, Farnham GU9 7Q. Operations of the existing workshop, Class B1C, to form a 2-storey dwelling with associated garden, creation of wildlife area beyond the proposed garden, as amplified by the ecology report received on the 17th of August. And Philippa to introduce this application.
Thank you, Chairman. The application is for the change of use and alterations to an existing workshop to form a 2-storey dwelling with associated garden and the creation of a wildlife area. I'd like to draw your attention to the update sheet which corrects the proposed ground floor plan, which previously did not show an entrance to the proposed games room, and the proposed first floor plan, which did not show the proposed high-level window in the southwestern side elevation. This has not affected the officer's recommendation set out in the agenda report. I would like to point out to members that permission was granted in 2016 for the change of use and alterations of the workshop to a residential dwelling. This permission is extant and could be implemented. The key difference with the extant permission is that it did not propose first floor accommodation. A comparison between the extant scheme and the proposed scheme was provided later in this presentation. This slide shows the location plan and block plan. The application site is to the north of Waden Mill Lane, an unmade track accessed via Red Lion Lane, which runs parallel to the A31 Farnham bypass. To the north of the site is Bishop's Meadow, which is low-lying agricultural land. The site comprises a single-storey building set in a large plot which was originally erected as a milking parlour, but has historically been used as a craft workshop and for light industrial use. The site sits between 2 branches of the River Wey and is located to the far west corner of the Farnham Conservation Area. There are residential properties to the south-east and south-west of the site. Here we have an aerial photograph which shows the location of the workshop here, and I've indicated in blue, sort of drawn on lines, the 2 branches of the River Wey, and the A31 is here to the south. I provided some site photographs. So photograph A is taken from the southwest, from the existing access road. Photograph B is taken from the northeast, from the rear garden area. From photograph C is taken from the southeast, looking from Waden Mill Lane. And D is taken from the north, from Bishop's Meadow. Photograph E is taken from the southeast, looking towards the area that would be the proposed wildlife area. Photograph F is taken from the northeast, looking along the southern elevation of the building, and G is taken from the southwest, looking along the northern elevation of the building. This slide shows the existing elevations of the workshop. As I've said previously, the building is single-storey. On this slide, you can see the proposed elevations. The proposal would increase the maximum roof ridge height by 1.3 metres. And the proposed elevations show the location of the proposed dormer. Oh, sorry. There we are. It shows the location of the proposed dormer windows in the southern elevation which fronts Waden Mill Lane, this slide. The proposed dormer windows and first floor canopy projection on the northern elevation here, and a number of additional windows and the porch canopy over the garage door here. This slide shows the existing and proposed floor plans, and obviously the key difference here is that first floor accommodation is proposed within the roof space. I've provided a comparison with the approved scheme, which was approved in 2016. This scheme is extant and could be implemented. Members will note the approved scheme involved minor alterations to fenestration. The proposed scheme would involve alterations to provide first floor accommodation in the roof space. Moving on to the determining issues, the matters of principle and technical opinion are principle of development. The application site is within the developed area of Farnham. Loss of commercial uses. The proposal would result in the loss of the existing commercial use. However, it is noted that the commercial use on this site has been restricted by Section 106 agreement and conditions which limit its use. Furthermore, the building is adjacent to other residential properties in a location that is not considered to lend itself to commercial uses. Furthermore, it's a material consideration that there's an extant permission for a residential use which could be implemented. Impact on the riverbank. The alterations are minor in scale and will therefore not impact the riverbank. Flood risk. The Environment Agency have been consulted on the application and have raised no concerns subject to a number of conditions. The proposal was considered acceptable with regard to flooding. With regard to archaeology, the ground disturbance would be minimal, and the county archaeologist considers that it's unlikely that archaeological remains will be affected. In terms of highway access and parking, the County Highway Authority has raised no concerns regarding the proposal, and sufficient off-street parking would be provided as part of the scheme. In terms of the effect on the SPA, the recommendation is subject to the completion of a legal agreement to secure contributions towards Farnham Park. Members are asked to exercise their judgment in relation to the following matters: impact on the Farnham green envelope. The proposal involves a minor increase in size and scale of the building, so it's not considered by officers to result in an impact on the green envelope. The impact on conservation area. Officers consider that the proposal would lead to less than substantial harm to the conservation area, and there are sufficient public benefits to outweigh the harm that it would contribute, as it would contribute in a small way to the borough's housing need. Design and impact on visual amenity, standard of accommodation and provision of amenity and play space, and the impact on residential amenity. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you very much, Philippa. Move on to public speaking now. And first I call on Victor Green. You have 4 minutes, sir, from when you start speaking. Thank you.
My name is Victor Green. I'm the owner and resident of Waverley Mill in Waverley Mill Lane, and I represent all the residents of Waverley Mill Lane tonight. This application involves significant alterations to the profile, structure and shape of the building that are out of keeping with the scale and character of neighbouring properties. There are also changes to the surrounds and changes which have a detrimental effect on the biodiversity and our privacy. The roof height will be raised, I understand, by 1.3 metres and includes 6 dormer extensions, one of which is a massively overbearing and projecting construction. Windows in the upper floor at the eastern and western ends of the building overlook neighbouring properties and affect their privacy. Windows overlooking Waverley Mill Lane, the dormer extensions and floor-to-ceiling windows are all contrary to advice a number of us received from Waverley planning officers on previous occasions when we were making changes to our buildings. A number of documents that make up this application attempt to justify the increase in height and the design of the roof as carried out in line to be carried out in line with the design of a mill previously on the site. This mythical building is a fiction. There never has been a mill on the site. I had a profile drawing showing the increase. There is an increase almost 100% of the building profile when it's viewed from the cottages and from the mill. The drawing in the arboricultural report shows an extension of the drive and parking area at the western end of the building. This will necessitate the removal of the shrubbery alongside the footpath, an area of 20 metres long by about 2 metres wide, making up the sloping ground and constructing support walls to retain that ground, the entire length. This is on 3 sides of the driveway. This appears to be in conflict with EU regulations regarding raising ground levels in a floodplain, and also leads to the development coming within 2 metres of the 2 watercourses at the north and south boundaries. The EU regulation is 8 metres. The EA do not appear to have been made aware of the build-up of the ground and the need for retaining walls when they were asked to comment on this proposal. That was clear in their response. The property contains a diverse range of trees, shrubs and plants that provide shelter and food for the many creatures which abound in the valley. The vegetation also provides a screen to residents in the lane and users of the Bishop's Meadow. Removing, reducing or pollard in any of these will not only open up views of the building to all, but also reduce the biodiversity of the site. The EA and South Surrey Wildlife Trust policy recommendations are that all buildings in the area should have a green screen between them and the Bishop's Meadow. Local and national policy are that wherever possible, biodiversity should be improved and at least protected, if not, should not be reduced. The applicant has given assurance to me that the wildlife area on the southwest corner would be extended to include the area of trees and shrubbery to the southeast of the building. And also that the removal pollarding of trees will be minimised to reduce the environmental impact on the biodiversity and protect the privacy of the residents of the lane. This was also promised to us by the previous developer when the single-storey change of use was under consideration by the council. This was submitted in our, stated in our submission at that time, but it's unclear whether any condition regarding this was imposed by the council when approving that application.
Can I ask you to come to a conclusion, please, Mr. Green? Thank you.
Just finished. Just on time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Green.
Thank you.
I now call on Genevieve Wells.
I'm sorry, I've got a really sore throat, so I'm hoping
Not
I
a problem.
don't lose my voice.
You have 4 minutes from when you start talking.
Right, okay. Thank you, Chairman, and good evening. The application site is currently a lawful light industrial building for the employment of 2 people. There are no restrictions on the hours of business use or vehicle movements, although it is relevant that the building has been vacant for a number of years. In September 2016, full planning permission was granted to the change of use of the building to a dwelling, and this permission is still extant and can be implemented. Combined with the location of the site in the developed area of Farnham, the principle of residential development is established. The scheme before you now seeks to use the roof space area of the existing building as part of the conversion, requiring a modest raising of the ridge height and the insertion of dormer and roof-light windows. This would add a new floor to living accommodation to the property, whilst the rest of the site would remain the same as already approved, as both residential garden and wildlife area. The applicant for this development is different to that of 2016 approved scheme. The current applicant is an existing Farnham resident who wishes to undertake the proposed conversion and the site landscaping works with the added use of the roof space area, providing enhanced family living accommodation, including an increase in the number of bedrooms from 2 to 3 for dependent children. As you can see from the agenda report, the proposed windows are subservient to the building, set down from the proposed ridge and pitched roofs and matching materials. The front projection provides a central architectural focus to the building and a covered porchway area. The approved materials are brick and tile, and tonight's proposal includes the same, with the addition of timber cladding to respect the semi-rural and conservation area location. The proposed changes have been assessed and accepted by the Council's Historic Building Officer, who acknowledges that whilst larger, the revised design would be more architecturally interesting. The building orientation and separation distance to neighbouring properties protects neighbouring amenity in relation to overlooking, loss of light and overbearing, and the proposed internal space and parking provision also meets the policy requirements. We anticipated that concern may be raised about the treatment of the wider site, and so the application has been further supported with an updated biodiversity, tree and drainage reports. These have been consulted on and agreed by both internal and external statutory consultees, subject to a series of recommended conditions which we agree to and will fully adhere to. Such conditions are also comparable to the approved and extant residential permission, including detailed planting protection and a maintenance scheme for a wildlife area. This is condition 5. And control over the proposed materials and removal of future permitted development rights to ensure that the development preserves the character and appearance of the conservation area. The proposed planting strategy would also form the boundary treatment for the site and enhance the degree of privacy between the site and the nearest residential neighbours. Finally, the application includes a legal agreement to secure the financial mitigation for the effect of the development on the special protection area. So in conclusion, I hope that you're reassured by my comments today. We trust that we have worked well with your officers throughout the application process to create a scheme for an existing local resident to develop this site with appropriate control over the property appearance and landscaping to ensure the scheme preserves the character of the area. It is therefore requested that your officers' recommendation be supported this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. We now move on to Councillor George Hess. So you just switched the microphone off. Hit the big button in the middle, and the red light's on. You're live.
Good evening, Chairman and Councillors. My name is George Hess, and I'm an elected member for Farnham Town Council, representing Castle Ward, where the workshop in Waden Mill Lane, subject of this new application, is located. I'm here on behalf of Farnham Town Council, who have reconsidered this application and object to the second storey, and to present reasons why this new planning application should be refused. The background to this application is that there is a full current planning permission for change of use from a workshop to a single-storey dwelling with garden and wildlife area. Local residents and neighbours did not object to this previous application, which was granted because they agreed it was a reasonable use of an unused building, creating an unobtrusive dwelling that would fit well into its sensitive location in the conservation area. The location is in a prominent position overlooking Bishop's Meadow Green open space, which was bought in 2005 by public subscription and identified in 2013 by Waverley Borough Council as a site of nature conservation importance, and was award winner of the 2014, 2016, gold in 2017, gold in 2018 SSEIB awards, South and South East in blue, that is. However, this new application seeks to enlarge the proposed dwelling significantly with the addition of a second storey, taking the ridge height up 22%, creating an entirely different building with the associated bulk and massing. We do not accept the officer's conclusion that the adverse visual impacts and harm to the conservation area would be minor. The design, scale and character of the proposed two-storey building with its floor-to-ceiling windows, roof lights and dormers is totally out of keeping with surrounding properties. And in recent years, two immediate neighbours were advised by successive Waverley Borough Council planning officers that permission for doors, roof lights and dormers facing the lane would not be granted. Therefore, to permit this scheme with these features would be inconsistent and unfair to residents. Additionally, the first floor window on the southwest side elevation would overlook the gardens of numbers 1 to 4 Waden Mill cottages, exacerbated by proposed tree removal, which is unacceptable. The proposed scheme would appear to be in conflict with local policies. For example, contained in the reports with the application under planning policies is policy HE8, conservation areas, and it states, the Council will seek to preserve or enhance the character of the conservation area by A, the retention of those buildings and other features, including trees, which make a significant contribution to the character of the conservation area. B, requiring a high standard for any new development within or adjoining conservation areas to ensure the design is in harmony with the characteristic form of the area and surrounding buildings in terms of scale, height, layout, design, building style and materials. And D, protecting open spaces and views important to the character and setting of the area. I am advised that there are 2 mature acacia trees on the south side, a willow tree in the middle, plus a further tree to the front on the site that the developer intends to fell, and 2 trees facing the meadow they intend to reduce. Removing or pollarding these trees and shrubs will open up views of the building to everyone using the meadow. Environment Agency and Surrey Wildlife Trust policy recommendations are that all buildings in the area should have a green screen between them and the meadow. Indeed, when the Bishop's Meadow Trust took over responsibility, they were advised to plant screening trees, and about 100 trees were duly planted. I hope you will agree the reasons for refusing this application are compelling, and thank you very much for your time tonight considering this objection.
Thank you, Councillor. Members. Councillor Hyman.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I am one of the ward members, Waverley ward members for Castle Ward, where this is. There's the difficulty with this application, of course, is in that there is already an extant permission there. Because, I mean, I think the reasoning for, I have some difficulty in supporting this, I must admit, because if we turn to the bottom of page 19 and page 20, I mean, my reasons are all in that section, I think. And, I mean, I won't repeat what Mr Green and Councillor Hess have said on behalf of the Town Council, which made very good points, and I fully appreciate what the applicant has said, and I understand their position, but Farnham jealously guards its heritage assets, and this is on the edge of the town centre conservation area. The second paragraph from the bottom of page 19 explains about the medieval layouts and the rest of it. The bottom paragraph there says that the historic buildings officer at Waverley was consulted upon this, and he then considered that it would dilute an appreciation that the application is part of the industrial history of Farnham. He says it's a modern building with little architectural merit, but the 2 middle paragraphs on page 20, to me, I can't understand the reasoning behind the conclusion that our officers have come to there myself, because as it says at the bottom of the third paragraph on page 20, there is a presumption against granting planning permission here. So we see that there is a presumption against granting planning permission. And then it says the NPPF states that where it will lead to less than substantial harm to the significance of a designated heritage asset, so there is some harm, but it actually has to be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal in securing its optimal viable use. Well, I've looked at the size of the building that's proposed with the extra floor. It seems to me, I mean, it's 2 or 3 times as big as the minimum standards that we apply to buildings. So we don't need to have that second floor and its intrusiveness on the conservation area and the residential amenity of the neighbours in order for it to secure an optimal viable use, as far as I can see. So I can't understand why that argument is being made in favour of the development. And it further says that the benefits outweigh the identified harm. Well, if that benefit isn't there, then it can't outweigh it, and that presumption against granting planning permission for me has to stand. There are other issues, particularly that Mr. Green raised the issue of flood risk and raising land levels in order to be able to do the access and building of retaining walls. I haven't had a chance to go through the flood risk assessment in detail, but it does seem to me that this hasn't been properly considered, and I would like to know precisely whether the Environment Agency are aware of the land raising in there and what officers can tell us in that respect. And finally, Chairman, obviously what you might call standard objection is in respect of the fact that there is no appropriate assessment. There's a document called one, which I printed out and left on top of my printer, but we know what it says. It doesn't contain the birds numbers that are required in accordance with the Commission versus Greece ruling, and it doesn't have the Sweetman rulings requirement for evidence of efficacy of the mitigation. So we don't have an appropriate assessment. We cannot lawfully grant consent unless there is reasons of imperative reasons of overriding public interest, and there's no application on that basis, although we might consider it on that basis at another time, possibly. So in view of the law, I have to vote against this, and I strongly suggest other members do as well, because we have got Nolan principles that rule us, and I would certainly do have objections in terms of retained policy TC10, which is the green envelope. And the other things that have been mentioned, including flood risk. But if you can, please, for the benefit of other members, clarify the raising of land levels issue, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. Louise?
Thank you. The application doesn't include, as part of the main details, any alterations to the land levels. However, if members are concerned about this, then we could put on a condition to state that no alterations to land levels should take place until a scheme for land level changes has been submitted to and approved by the local planning authority. Land levels should only be altered in accordance with the approved details. So something to that effect would ensure that land levels aren't altered unless they submit the details to us, which would ensure that we would have control and make an assessment on the flood risk impact of those. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Councillor Fraser.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Previous application 15/1746 met with approval 2 years ago because it was modest in scale and discreetly concealed behind retained screen of vegetation. The presumption of approval for a dwelling is now used to propose a 2-storey chalet house with a high ridgeline, conspicuous dormers, and a dominant projecting entrance and garage canopy. Whilst we were not opposed to conversion to housing, we should now be opposed to the suburban intrusion into the sylvan prospect of the riverside edge of Bishop's Meadow and in a conspicuous corner of Farnham Conservation Area and in conflict with the Farnham Neighbourhood Plan. The proposed structure is too dominant in height and apparent scale. It becomes the more visible from Bishop's Meadow as a result of the intention to fell trees and remove shrubs screening the northwestern elevation. The result is an overbearing visual intrusion. The scale of the proposal is excessive, an aspect rendered less apparent to our eyes by the comparison elevations in the agenda papers being drawn to slightly different scales, and thereby reducing the apparent bulk of the new structure. I also see that there were disparities in the drawings, now corrected, thank you, and I understand that there are some conflicts in the references to descriptions given. It can be seen that there are issues regarding the overlooking of neighbouring properties and a consequent loss of privacy. There is clearly no public benefit in the change from previous application to the current one. In my opinion, the current proposal detracts seriously from the character of the conservation area, and the visual impact does substantial harm to the environment. As always, our planning officers make a comprehensive review of matters for our consideration, and well done for that. But in weighing up those matters, they come to conclusions that appear to be in conflict with the evidence. In consequence, they recommend that we make the wrong decision. I will not be supporting this application. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Beeman, you wish to take part in the debate?
Yes, please. Thank you, Chair. At the end of the day, I think we've been asked to make a very difficult decision, because it's obviously a very subjective judgment. But the key in the officer's report to me is the third paragraph on page 20, which says, in light of the above, the proposal would lead to less than substantial harm to the significance of the heritage asset, and as such would fail to conserve the character of the conservation area. As such, there is a presumption against granting planning permission. Against that, they've weighed public benefits, one of which is they provide an initial dwelling, but that's already existing in the extant permission. And the question of it, and it would certainly be more conspicuous. So at the end of the day, I think we've been asked to make a very subjective judgment, and I think we ought to err on the side of the fact that of the status quo, because would you really want to see this building from Bishop's Meadow when it should be screened? So I've said, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yeah. Councillor Coburn.
Yeah, I wonder if we could just have the points up again, Philippa, you know, the matters for determination. I think this is incredibly difficult. It really is. I mean, we're talking about an area of the conservation area. We love the conservation area, but we're right in the far part of that. The existing building is not a thing of beauty. Even converted, it's not going to turn into a thing of beauty. And what's on offer in its just looking at, sorry? What's on offer is, I think, a better design. On the other hand, it is much larger, so its effect on neighbours and on the visual amenity as you look across Bishop's Meadow is obviously going to be greater. I think this is an incredibly difficult one, and I could understand what the officers are saying with the weights and the less than substantial harm. I understand the words, but it doesn't actually make it much easier to work out where the balance is between what the officer is saying, which of course is why it's in before us tonight, and why those matters of judgment are so difficult. So I'm really still sitting on the fence on this one. I find it really hard. I don't like the decision I have to make, basically, but we have to make it because that's the one that's in front of us. So, yes, I'll wait to hear what perhaps the chairman or somebody else would like to say before I make my final decision. Thank you.
Yes, I think a very difficult decision facing us. We have an extant permission of a building that I find would be very much at home on a farm as a cattle shed or something similar. I find the revised building under the current situation to be much more attractive and something I would rather be looking at than the one that is an extant permission. It is in the eye of the beholder, yes, I agree with that. A well-known phrase and saying, isn't it? But that is where I'm looking at it from at this moment in time. Do I want to see the extant building or do I want to see this one? Louise has already mentioned that we can condition the land levels, and I find that an acceptable addition to the conditions that we're already looking at. So before we move to the conditional officers, do you want to say anything else on the land levels or extent permission? Louise? No?
No, I don't think so. Thank you very much, Chairman.
Thank you very much indeed then. Sorry, Councillor Lee.
No, thank you, Chairman. Can we just have an answer as well, please, from the solicitor with regard to Councillor Hyman's points on law?
On the issues relating to the appropriate assessment?
Yes, indeed. Thank you.
Not a problem. My view as the legal officer is that the appropriate assessment is lawful. We have consistently made the same point in that it does comply with the sweepment ruling, which, as you know, requires mitigation to be considered at the appropriate assessment stage, not at the screening stage. Natural England are also happy with the appropriate assessment, and they are the appropriate nature conservation body, and we are strongly encouraged to follow their lead in this respect, unless we have very good reason not to. It otherwise complies with the Council's avoidance strategy, and for all those reasons, we are satisfied that it is a perfectly lawful appropriate assessment. We, of course, take Councillor Hyman's issues on board, but unfortunately don't agree with them. Thank you.
Councillor Lee, you want to come back on that?
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the clarity. My issue with this is the fact that it's a conservation area, because if it wasn't for the conservation area, I think on balance the determining issues would be valid. But the conservation area is a real issue for me, and I'm struggling to come to terms with the fact that we are going to offer an invasion of privacy in a conservation area, which effectively, yes, it may be mitigated by levels, but I'm not convinced that actually that is going to be enough to make it, keep it private enough for what it deserves to be in the conservation area. And those are my concerns. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. Councillor Hyman, do you want to come back?
Yes, only to that I think some of the members here were unaware of last week's, because we did have this discussion, but indeed Lewis Jones, our solicitor, wasn't the solicitor who was here last week at the Joint Planning Committee meeting. There is case law which, in Commission versus Greece, which establishes that you must have bird numbers, because we must look at the risk that we are undertaking in granting planning permissions, and so we need to look at the bird numbers, because that's at the heart of it. And so we need to have the numbers and the sorry, I should be addressing the chairman. We need to have the numbers in an appropriate assessment, as well as the details of the efficacy. Yeah. Now, it was said at that meeting by the solicitor there that the numbers are there in the appropriate assessment. I've hooked it up on my machine, and it was, and obviously they weren't. It's also been sent to me by officers this week, the appropriate assessment, and certainly that isn't there. So in terms of law, it isn't an appropriate assessment. Whatever anyone says, that is what the law has established.
Councillor Hyman,
so
just...
that's the situation we're in at the moment,
we're
Chairman.
talking about this particular assessment, and the planning lawyer has given his statement.
Well, we could again ask whether it's there then, so they will confirm that actually the bird numbers aren't there, so it's not an appropriate assessment. It's the same question as last time. I mean, it's tedious, but if I'm not going to get the correct answer to the question, when the answer's obvious, we seriously need to do something about this, don't we?
We've listened to the officers, and thank you very much for that, Lewis. No further comments, then we will move to the recommendation. Recommendations subject to conditions 1 to 9, informatives 1 to 9, and the additional condition on land levels, permission be granted. Those in favour, please show.
1, 2.
Those against?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
Therefore, can I have an alternative proposal, please? Councillor Coburn.
I propose, Chairman, that permission be refused.
Seconded by Councillor Hyman. And the reasons, please?
May I? Sorry, do you want to
Coburn?
go first, Carol?
Yes, thank you. I think by the size, what I'm trying to say is it's really the light. I just feel the fenestration of this, both the size and the design of the building with the increase in fenestration will have an adverse effect on the users of the Bishop's Meadow and people in the conservation area in general. It's a bit sort of wordy, but do you know what I mean? I feel it's too urbanising within a sort of unspoilt bit. It's difficult to say because we are right on the edge here, right next to the A31. But looking at it from the Bishop's Meadow, I just feel that this design, with its effect on neighbouring amenities because of the fenestration and the height, is probably unacceptable in this particular area. But I'm sure somebody can phrase that slightly better.
Councillor Lair?
Thank you, Chairman. To add to Councillor Coburn, I was going to suggest that actually it's the reduction in existing privacy of existing amenity for the enjoyment of those residents in that conservation area at Bishop's Meadow. And I think that is overpowering. Thank you.
Councillor Hyman?
Yes, residential amenity of neighbours, certainly. I agree on that. There's policy TC10, it's retained policy TC10, which is in respect to the green envelope, so impact on views from the green meadow, from the Bishop's Meadow. So that's that one. And the conservation area issue, which is based on expert officer advice that there will be harm. And the presumption applies, and that's section 72 of the Planning Listed Building and Conservation Areas Act 1990, as I'm sure officers know that, and policy HA1 of Local Plan Part 1 2018, adopted 2018, and retained policy HE8 of Local Plan 2002, Chairman. And of course, the one which we always have an argument over, which is Regulation 63 of, contrary to Regulation 63 of the Conservation and Habitats Regulations 2017, I think it is now, the latest, and Article 6.3 of the Habitats Directive. Yeah, no, I don't need to do any others. Thanks.
Councillor Coburn.
It's also landscape and loss of trees because. Again, the landscape, again, the visual impact from...
Does that come under green envelope? Sorry, Chairman, that might be all come under the policy TC10. Is there a separate policy that we've got in the neighbourhood plan? Can I ask Councillor Coburn?
Not specifically on this area, no.
Okay. Officers. Writing furiously.
Thank you.
Louise.
If I can just come back and make a couple of points on some of those suggestions. The first suggestion in relation to the conservation area, landscape and green envelope, I would suggest is all incorporated into one reason for refusal. And my suggested wording would be the proposal, by reason of its increased scale and bulk, the increase in fenestration and loss of landscape would result in less than substantial harm to the conservation area. The public benefit of the provision of a dwelling would not outweigh this harm. Furthermore, the proposal would result in harm to the green envelope. The proposal would therefore conflict with policies FNP1 and FNP2 of the Final Neighbourhood Plan, policy HA1 of the Local Plan Part 1 2018, and policy HE8 and TC10 of the Local Plan 2002 and the relevant paragraphs of the MPPF. So I would suggest that as one reason for refusal. In relation to the two other points, the first in relation to privacy, I would firstly caution members against refusing the application on this basis. The reason being is that there's 30 metres between the proposed dwelling and the existing properties on Wadham Mill Lane. Our residential extension guidelines suggests a minimum of 21 metres, and that is a direct window-to-window relationship, whereas in this particular case, as you can see from the block plan, windows would be facing sort of in this direction and this direction and none of them would directly face the properties at Wadham Mill Lane. So I would suggest that that reason may be hard to defend at appeal. So if you can just consider that. And finally, in relation to that, the habitats regulations and the impact on the SPA, a Section 106 has already been agreed. As we've previously discussed, an appropriate assessment has been carried out, and Natural England support the findings of the appropriate assessment. That reason for refusal certainly would be very, very hard to defend. This isn't a matter of judgment. We have the expert authority of Natural England, and my advice would be that if we do refuse the application on this basis, it is highly likely to result in a costs award against the council. So I would strongly advise that members refrain from refusing it for that particular reason. Thank you, members.
Thank you, members. Councillor Hyman, do you want to add something?
I think he does.
I've never heard of the highly likely to result in a costs award. I mean, there's plenty of case law. Obviously, the Sweetman judgment
I think,
obviously pointed out that what the approach by the Council and Natural England has been wrong for the past 10 years. I mean, that is the judgment that was out in April that's caused the problems, that the Council and Natural England were wrong. And obviously, they haven't done anything to change the situation. It's just been brought back with the habitats regulation assessment. But
excuse me,
how are we going to be? Can the officers please explain to me how we would end up with a costs awards if we're obeying the law? Because all we have to agree here as members, and it is our decision, is that there isn't an appropriate assessment because no one can put one in front of us that's got the bird numbers in it. That's easy enough. That's if there's one that's got the bird numbers, we can't.
Hyman.
We can't.
We have had an appropriate assessment. Natural England have accepted it. It would be unreasonable to refuse the application on the grounds of your suggestion on the appropriate assessment being included in the conditions. Therefore, I think it would be most unwise to open ourselves to that. Louise or Law? Sorry, Councillor Coburn wants to come in.
Well, just really to thank Louise for encapsulating all of our sort of stuttering into the policy. And you're absolutely right, rereading FNP2, it really covers most of the issues that you've mentioned and that we've mentioned. So I think, to have a concise, well-informed reason for refusal is really the way to go. And I do thank you very much for helping us out.
Therefore, Councillor Hyman.
Yes, if I can ask just some clarification in process here, because this means that if the members who wish to apply the law and the Habitats Directive, we're being advised that we put forward reasons that don't include that. Now, obviously, I would then vote against that, even though I want to vote for the other reasons. So, do we have to vote on the reasons separately? In order that we can decide whether the which reasons should be included, because I have to vote against what is being proposed by you as the reasons if it doesn't include reasons that I think should be, don't I? I mean, how do we resolve this, Chairman, please?
Vote against.
You vote against it. Simple. We've had our legal representation quite clearly stated. We've had Natural England quite clearly stated. We've had a debate on the whole matter, and I think we now move to the recommendation, which has been very clearly stated by our planning officers. So we move to the recommendation that planning permission be refused for the reasons stated. Those in favour, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5.
Those against?
1.
Abstentions? Me. Thank you very much indeed. Permission is therefore refused, and that completes our meeting. Thank you all very much indeed.